Welcome to the Lagoda. When you arrive on the train at New Bedford, everything's timed pretty well. The ship will not be tied to the pier. It'll be anchored out in the harbor. And you will get on a boat. You might get on a whaleboat. More likely you're going to get on one of the harbor craft that takes quite a few people. And they will shuttle you out to the ship. Sometimes people want to look at what the ship looks like, and they want to change their mind. But you're not going to go very far because it's too far in the harbor to swim to shore. So the mates will greet you, and they will tell you to find a bunk in the forecastle. Afterwards, you may want to go up forward. There's a glass you can look down and you can see into the forecastle. Very crowded. There's roughly 24 bunks down there, and there'll be probably about 20 guys there when you ship from New Bedford. And all the green hands and some of the seamen, some of whom have already made 2 or 3 voyages, will be there up forward. Probably about a day later, after you're settled into your bunk, a pilot will come aboard, and he'll pilot the ship out of the harbor, out into Buzzards Bay. And then the ship will hove to. They'll arrange the sails so they fight each other and won't make any headway. And a pilot boat will come out, will bring the captain. And the captain will come aboard, and the pilot will depart and go back to New Bedford. So that's your first chance to meet the captain, and he'll probably give you a lecture and tell you what he expects you to do. And one of the things he's going to tell you is he'll give you 2 weeks to learn all these ropes. You see all the ropes tied along the side here. And so you're going to have to learn the ropes. You're going to have to learn the sails. You're going to have to learn how to box the compass, because you will stand helm's watches. When you walk aft, you'll see another glass prism back there. And in that prism, you can see the compass. Of course, the helm is just after that prism, and you can see down into you can see the table where in the after cabin where the captain and the mates eat. Once you're at sea, you seamen aren't allowed to come after this mainmast right here. Your life is in the forecastle, forward in the mainmast. That's it, unless you have a job. If the mate sends you to the mizzen mast to furl a sail, you can do that, or if you have the helm. You'll be standing 4-hour watches while we're sailing from port to port. So you've already been assigned to either a starboard or a port watch, and you'll be 4 on and 4 off. The other 4 hours you'll be have time to sleep, eat, and learn your job. Once you get to the whaling grounds, we will pick boat watches, and then each boat has of course 6 men, and each one's in charge of a mate is in charge of each boat. You'll have more time off, except when we see a whale, of course, and then it's an all-hands evolution to go out and chase whales. Now, someone asked about the arrangement of the boats. The arrangement we have here isn't quite right, and I believe it's because of that Azorean whaleboat over there. The normal configuration on the ship is there are 3 boats tied on the port side, and there's the one that's aft there on the starboard side. That's called the starboard boat. The one aft on the other side is the larboard boat, and the one amidships is the waist boat, and the one up here is the bow boat. Most ships also had davits here for what's called a starboard bow boat, but it was rarely used. And the reason for that is you will see the cutting stage right here. When you kill a whale, you go out and kill a whale, and you have to tow him back to the ship. You bring him up along the starboard side of the ship right here, and he's chained to the ship. Then, so you need space. This boat would be in the way. They lower the cutting stage, and the mates go out on the cutting stage. They're the most experienced men, and they know how to do the cutting. They'll use cutting spades. If over here there's a grindstone, and you can check out a cutting spade being sharpened. They start cutting in the blubber. They'll cut a slot in it. Once they get a slot, one of the boat steerers will climb out on the whale, and they'll swing this out. This here is a blubber hook. It's a real blubber hook. Everything else on this ship is half scale. You got to double the height and the width and length of everything. But this is a real blubber hook. They'll bring it out, and the boat steerer will attach the blubber hook to the whale. And then you men will go up forward and start cranking on the windlass. And we got the block and tackle here. So as they're cutting, the whale will be rotating on his chains. And they'll be hoisting and hoisting. And when a piece of blubber gets all the way as far as up as the tackle will reach, that's what's called a blanket piece. The mates will cut that off. First, they'll cut a new hole, swing out another hook, hook that on, cut it off, swing that over, and drop it into the blubber room. The men down there will cut that blanket piece down smaller to, remember the horse pieces that I described to you that looked like an oversized loaf of bread? That's when we process from there. And I explained how we process the blubber once they do that. Now, if it's a baleen whale, of course, there's more than just the body blubber. They have to cut the lips off and the tongue and everything. There's a lot of pieces of the whale they have to cut up. But then they'll cut out the upper jaw. And you bring that jaw aboard, and the men will separate out the baleen and clean the baleen. I don't know if you've been told what use baleen is yet, but that's make busts for ladies' corsets and buggy whips and all sorts of things were made out of baleen. But you had to clean it so it didn't go bad while it was stored in the hold. Now, if it's a sperm whale, remember that spermaceti? Spermaceti sold for $1.50 a gallon in 1850 at the pier, wholesale price. We don't want to lose any of that. So what we'll do is we'll hook onto the whale's head, and we'll bring the whole whale's head on board here. There's enough space for most whales. If it's too big, we got to do it off the side here. Now we'll cut into the whale's head, and we'll start bucketing out the spermaceti. Remember, it's a liquid. As long as it's in this head, it's nice and warm, and then it'll like crystallize after a while. That's why I got the name spermaceti in the first place. When you're bucketing out and bucketing out, finally you get to the point you can't reach anymore, right? Hey, young sailor, go in there. Yeah, bucket it out, right? There's a couple of other things on the bottom. There's besides the spermaceti, there's stuff called junk, which is really good stuff, but it's called junk. And underneath that is white horse. I don't quite sure what happened. I've never read in the log what they do with the white horse, but the junk is important. So then after you get all that out, you just haul the case back over the side, dump the rest of the whale. We're done. Okay.
And how long does it take?
To cut up a whale and boil them out, usually they boil them out on the watch once they get the fire started, but to get them all cut up and to start boiling takes like a whole day plus, and sometimes you got more than one whale out there, so you work it right. You could have 2 or 3 whales.
So what do they do with the other 2 whales?
They tie them up right alongside, you know, one right outside of the other, right? So they consider the fact that if you're gonna spend a couple of days boiling out whales, and you got one change of clothes, you're going to go up to the forecastle and you're going to sleep in those clothes until you're done, and then you make up a soap with your own urine to wash your clothes after you're done. But you can imagine what the forecastle smells like while you're doing this. Oh yeah, by the way, that recruiter told you that the food's great. Yeah, what the last not long ago I read one that said we get salt horse and bread for dinner, and bread and salt horse for supper, right? Okay, of course, the bread is hardtack, and the cook will make a big pot of something. Okay, it's usually some sort of a stew or whatever, and with the meat, it was either heavily salted beef or pork, and he brings that up in a bucket up to the forecastle, and you take your share out of there, and you sit on your sea chest, and you have your dinner, right? The hardtack, what you do is you always get hot coffee with it, because the hardtack you dip in the hot coffee, and that'll soften it so you can eat it. And also the worms come out of the hardtack, so you can get rid of those, right? And you can enjoy both, right? The mate and the captains do a little bit better. When the boat steerers eat before the mates and the captain, and they'll sit at the table, and they'll have molasses with their meal, doing a little bit better than the guys forward, right? When they're done eating, the steward will take that molasses away and put sugar out, and so the mate and the captains are the only ones getting sugar. Now, I would like to take you to one more stop, and that's right up by I want to show you what happens when we return to port, and you're finally going to make some money, right? And that's right out here to the right. If you want to get a quick look in either of the prisms first, that's fine, but I'll meet you out there in a couple of minutes. I had two questions that I was asked. The first one was about scurvy. What ships would do is they would go out into the whaling grounds, and they would cruise back and forth in the whaling grounds until they ran out of water. And when the water got low, they would pull into an island, and they would first get water. But then the captain would trade, and some of the men would trade themselves usually for fresh vegetables and hogs and chickens, and fruit. It was rather common that it took a while to run out of water, so that the captain felt like going into an island. So it was not uncommon on a voyage for several guys to come down with scurvy. It happened. I read several logs where they sometimes tried to avoid it, but if just one or two guys had scurvy, the captain would just ignore them. The second question I had was about the casts. The casts, I mentioned the casts are made up just before they fill them. There are some casts made up that have ballast in them. They're filled with salt water, and many of the casts are made up and they're filled with supplies. All the extra sails, all the food, and the water are all in casks. So usually as they whaled, some of the ones with salt water would be emptied to be replaced with casks. Now you'll notice the casks, when they go to sea, they have shooks. It's just the wooden pieces. They get lots and lots of those bundled up, and the cooper has to assemble those. You notice they're different sizes. A barrel of oil was defined as 31.5 gallons in the 19th century. The capacity of the Lagoda was approximately 3,000 barrels. There isn't a single cask on the ship that's 31.5 gallons. They were the sized to fit in all the nooks and crannies. The biggest ones down the middle were usually 200 gallons, or sometimes a little bigger. The smaller ones fit in the corners and in between, right? Okay, so that's how we fill the ship. Now, when you finally get back to port, we're going to meter the oil. They'll take the casks. Stevedores will unload casks off the ship, and they'll roll them up on the pier, and they'll be greeted by a gentleman who works for the buyers. And what he'll do, he'll take each cask, it's on his side, he'll take the bunghole out, and he'll put this metering stick in the cask, and he can quickly calculate how much oil is in that cask. He knows what the oil is because the cask is marked, whether it's spermaceti or blubber oil from a sperm whale or from some other whale, right? So And you know, you got to watch out for these guys because some of those coopers are really sneaky. They'll shave one of the chutes on the opposite side from the bunghole, so that when he puts that in there, it looks like there's a little bit more oil in it than he's measuring. Right. So he's got to be pretty shrewd and watch out for those crooks. But anyhow, he'll take a sample, and he has a way of checking the viscosity. I don't believe we have that meter here, but he'll smell it. He'll check the color, and he'll record that all in his book. And then he will mark that all down, and they'll figure out how much the price is for the oil. Okay. Now we're going to settle with you young sailors. So you'll come up to the owners and the agent, and the agent will say, all right, we sold all the oil, and you signed on for a 1/190th lay. You've been out to sea for 4 years. Of course, you didn't know. You signed on for a voyage. You didn't know it was going to be 4 years. That was one of the surprises you got out there, right? And now your lay, we divide 190 into the price of the oil, and your share is $325, typical number. Okay, and by 325, that's all I get for 4 years? Oh, wait a minute. You know that sea chest we fitted you out with when you left port? You mean that piece of junk? Those clothes fell apart a month at sea. Right? And it wasn't worth $10, the whole thing. Eh? We had to pay the agent $75 for that. And we were out that money, so we charged you interest on it while you were at sea. Right? And you also, when you hit port, you went over, the captain gave you a little advance so you could go over to the port and get a beer, right? He marked all that down. We had to subtract that out. And the captain had a medicine cabinet, which when you were sick, you went aft. The captain treated you, right? That comes out of the sailors' wages. And the stevedores that unloaded the ship. We subtract those things out, you owe us $35.